he had this Orrin Hatch had this big flip out with Sherrod Brown this week where he accused him of, basically Sherrod Brown of class warfare. Or, like, I used to be poor, and how dare you? Well, I'm sick of this crap where you're always saying we're trying to help the rich when that's not what we're trying to do, which is clearly what they're trying to do. But understand this. That Orrin Hatch, there's a story about Orrin Hatch from years ago. Orrin Hatch was a co-signer of a bill that helped fund what are called orphan diseases. Diseases that don't have enough victims to warrant federal funding, and included in these diseases, were things like Tourette's syndrome, for example. And Jack Klugman, the star of the television show Quincy, which, if you're not familiar, is about it's CSI early '80s. It's the first experience where they showed a medical examiner being part of the discovery, inquest, and mystery-solving world of television stories in a lot of ways. Really fantastic show. Loved it. My mom's a nurse. We watched it whenever we could. Watched it at my grandmother's house. We didn't have a TV when I was a kid. And loved Jack Klugman, loved Quincy. And he did a couple of shows that really stood out, in case you don't know. One being about rape kits. One of the reasons why we have rape kits in this country, in hospitals, why they have them ready and prepared in case people come in, and the backlog of them not being checked is another story, and if only Jack Klugman was alive to bring this. But the existence of them at all has to do with the fact that Jack Klugman pushed for this on Quincy. They did an episode about rape victims. One who had been murdered. He would have been able to get the information. He would have had the evidence he needed had they taken a rape kit when she first showed up. And one of the women who, females, I think it was a senator or congressperson or a judge or somebody, fought her on it, and then she was later attacked. And because she called him right away, they were able to administer this rape kit right away and catch her attacker, who was the same person who had raped and murdered someone earlier in the episode that they were showing. And because of that, there was a groundswell of, hey, why don't we have this? It was one of the factors. There were a lot of people pushing for it, but this episode of primetime television had a lot to do with why we have them. Okay. Then, because we did not have them when the show aired, this was not a regular thing. We take them for granted in some ways, and we, like I said, one of the biggest things we need to do is a movement towards dealing with the backlog in rape kits. That being said, Jack Klugman did this episode to draw attention to this. One of the other episodes he did was about Tourette's syndrome, a young man who was beaten to death because he swore at the wrong people because he couldn't help it because he had Tourette's. And it was an episode where they taught about what Tourette's meant and who was afflicted by it and what medications. There was no medications or treatments that were really readily available. And this poor boy had been killed because he had mouthed off the wrong people and couldn't control it. And so this was an episode about Tourette's syndrome and dealing with it. And there was such little movement on dealing with federal funding to help research Tourette's at the time. And there certainly weren't the kind of, giant like AIDS walk or anti-breast cancer walks or those kind of movements that helped to fund things like this that weren't prioritized back then the way there are now. And so Jack Klugman took this all the way to Capitol Hill. And one of the people who kept pushing back on it, on the bill as it went through, was Orrin Hatch. Orrin Hatch was one of the people who did not want this. He was taking action to make sure that this bill that would allocate a relatively minor amount of money towards these diseases that didn't have enough victims to impress Orrin Hatch, he ran interference on this. He took it upon himself not just to not vote for it, but to rally against it. And Jack Klugman went to Washington, D.C., went to Orrin Hatch's office, had I think a 2-hour meeting with Orrin Hatch, and when he came out of that meeting, Orrin Hatch co-signed the bill. Orrin Hatch was one of the primary co-signers on the orphan diseases bill because of Jack Klugman. Orrin Hatch has had to be pushed to do the right thing his entire time in office. And not just motivated to do the good thing, but motivated away from doing the bad thing, doing something damaging, stopping progress. So his little freak out with Sherrod Brown and his anger about not being, about being judged should be understood in that context. I do not think Orrin Hatch is a terrible human being. I don't think he's evil. I don't think he deserves to lose his job in that regard, although I would not vote for him. It is not that kind of circumstance. But his pushback over this has to be known in the context